Hey, what's up everyone, and welcome back to another video. So before we get into this video, I kind of want to set the scene. So as a data scientist, one of our biggest roles is often to communicate insights about data to business stakeholders and clients. And oftentimes these people might not be the most tech savvy. Oftentimes it might not make sense to send these people, large files of code or even Jupyter notebooks. But instead, it would make a lot more sense to send them some sort of analytics report that maybe captures all of our visualizations in a nice PDF format. In prepping for this video, I kind of looked up something along the lines of like how to create an analytics report in Python, and I didn't find much. So as kind of a classic engineer, I decided to take this into my own hands and figure out a solution that I thought worked pretty well for the task. So this is going to be a two-part series. In this first video, we are going to learn how we can create a PDF analytics report in Python. And for this report, we're going to be using COVID-19 data from around the globe to create all sorts of visualizations on, and then ultimately package those up in a nice PDF using the Python FPDF library. In the second video of this series, we're going to actually learn how we can schedule these scripts to run automatically using AWS Lambda and CloudWatch, and then actually send the reports that we create via email to any contacts of our choosing. Before we get started, I want to give a quick shout out to this video's sponsor, and that is Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes for creative and curious people. They have classes on topics that range from photography to marketing to creative writing. And all of these classes are kind of oriented around real life situations so that you can really take away skills and apply them in your day-to-day life. Some topics that I think are particularly exciting for all of you would be classes that they offer on business analytics, web development, as well as freelance and entrepreneurship. Recently, I decided I wanted to kind of level up my Instagram game. So I took a course by Brandon Wolfel called Instagram Worthy Photography, Shoot, Edit, and Share with Brandon Wolfel. And from that class, took away a lot of different information on the camera settings that I should use, as well as kind of how to light my subjects in different situations. And I hope to apply this to my own Instagram very soon. It's exciting how many different classes that Skillshare offers and just the breadth of all of the different material that you can learn. If you're interested in joining, membership costs less than $10 a month when you sign up with an annual subscription. Also, the first 1,000 people to use the link in the description will get a free trial to Skillshare's premium membership. All right, let's get into the video. All right, the first thing we're going to want to do is to navigate to github.com/keithgalli/generate analytics report. And I'll make sure to link this in the description. Once you're there, you can kind of look around a little bit. Ultimately, we'll be creating an analytics report that looks like this, which I think looks really cool. I also left some setup information here. But what I recommend is getting all of these files locally. So to do that, we can click on this code button and we can copy this link. A lot of you will probably use HTTPS to clone this, but I'm going to use SSH. And if you don't know how to do a git clone, you can always download the zip folder here. So next, once we've copied that link, you should open up a terminal window. And if you're using Mac or Linux, probably your default terminal is fine. On Windows, Git Bash works well, Windows Terminal works well, and I'm using a program called Commander. So I'm going to do a git clone and then paste in that link I just copied. All right, and then I'm going to cd into that new folder we just cloned. So I can cd into Generate Analytics Report, and if I do ls, we can see all the files there. So what I recommend at this point is running the Generate Report file. And if this works, then great, your setup is complete. But if it doesn't, we'll want to just make sure to install some libraries. So we see we don't have the FPDF library, so I'm going to do pip install FPDF. Looks like that is good. I'm going to try running that file again. No module named pandas. So there's a bunch of other libraries that we need to install, but to speed things up, I'm going to just install it in one go. So pip install pandas, then I'm going to do space numpy, space matplotlib, space plotly, space kaleido. I think these are the last libraries that we'll need. But how I would kind of go about this is anytime an error message popped up, I would just install if I didn't know ahead of time what I needed. All right, everything looks to be installed. So I'm going to do clear to just clean up my terminal, and then I'm going to run generate report again and just see if things work. I see I'm getting a numpy issue. I did run into this earlier today, and I found out by copying this URL right here that something is going on with numpy version 1.193. So I was able to solve it by doing 1.193 as my installation, or there's an issue with 1.194. So downgrading one minor version fixed this for me. Not sure if you'll run into this one. Now let's try it one more time. This script will take, I think, around 30 seconds to run if I'm not mistaken, so just give it time if it's taken a sec. We see that it has executed, so we're going to go ahead. I'm going to bring in my folder. I'm going to click on Generate Analytics Report. We see right now it is exactly 12:19 p.m. and I see that a new report was created then. So that looks like everything executed properly. I can double click on this and ultimately see my analytics report. Looks really cool. And note, for testing purposes, I have some hard-coded strings that I'll show you that is just set to October 10th by default, but we can change this to read current data, I guess from the previous day. All right, now that we have all of our files locally, we can go ahead and open up a text editor and start playing around with things. So I'll be using Sublime Text for this. So I'm gonna open the folder, and I have it in Generate Analytics Report, select folder, and we're good here. So when we generated the report, we ultimately generated this file here. So you're welcome to look through this, but I think what will probably be easiest is let's just create a new report file from scratch, and we can start building up the pieces and seeing what we have available in this repo to kind of build a custom report of our choosing. So I'm going to do new file. I'll save it as new report.py, and this will be our blank slate that we can start using this FPDF library to write code. So I think it's worthwhile probably to look up the Python FPDF library, the documentation, and see how we can, really start using things. So here we go. Here is the FPDF library for Python. You can create PDFs, as the name implies, using Python through this library. Probably easiest is, maybe go to the Python, what the heck? Okay, I guess that Python 3 page doesn't work, but go to the tutorial and just start seeing, what code examples are here. So let's go ahead maybe and just copy this code here. Just kind of get a proof of concept of creating our first PDF, and then we'll start doing more sophisticated stuff. So copy and paste that. I'll leave the link to the docs for FPDF in the description. But right now it looks like we're just writing hello world basically on a FPDF doc. So let's go ahead and run this. It has finished. Kind of on the side, I will keep open a window so I can easily load this. So we just generated tuto1.pdf. Hello world, look at that. That's what we just generated using this little snippet we see here. And we can do all sorts of more interesting stuff, I guess, here. So we could maybe make this an F string and do hello world, or say something like, hello, my name is name. And then we could set the variable name equals Keith up here. And now if we run this again, 221, I'm going to just call this tutorial1 or tutorial.pdf because 22, I don't know, I'm not feeling the name. Nothing wrong with the name, but just not feeling it. All right, let's run this again. Open up, we're going to delete 221, tutorial.pdf. Hello, my name is Keith. We see that we've just dynamically added our variable into the file that we generated, so that is cool. All right, and so let's start getting more sophisticated in figuring out what else we can do. Going back to the documentation, let's just start seeing what other types of things we can do. So we can kind of just keep walking our way through this tutorial. So I think first off, we see that there's a couple different parameters we can pass in when we're creating a PDF. And so right here it says that pages are created with A4 format by default, which is kind of the standard internationally. Here in the US, we use letter. So if I wanted to specify a portrait paper in millimeters that it uses the letter dimensions, I could do that doing the following: P millimeters, and then I would type in letter. I also could, and I could run that and see we have no errors, and that just creates a similar tutorial to PDF. I could also, look through the documentation a little bit further and click on the FPDF object and see that I could just use the keyword argument to define that I just want it letter. So I could also do something like, format equals letter, and I'd run that. That would work just fine too. I'm going to just keep it with the defaults though for now. I just want to show that you can change that. So we are going to use those defaults. So A4 is what we are using. So one thing I think that's good to do is to just make sure you have clear what the millimeter sizes for a A4 paper is. So we see we have 210 by 297. So width of 210 millimeters, height of 297 millimeters. So real quick, I'm going to just define those as variables here. So width equals 210, height equals 297. And it'll make sense why I'm doing this in a little bit, but I think it's just helpful reference. I'm going to just start cleaning this up. I'll just keep this as hello world. Okay, so we have the width and the height. We know that by default we're using A4. We have just some basic text on the screen. What else can we do? So I think one of the next things that might be useful to do is actually include an image in our PDF. So text is cool, but oftentimes I think images is what really makes our PDF more like a report. So let's go back to our documentation and let's just look for image somewhere in here. So we see image down here. And how do we use the image? Well, we see we first pass in a name, and then it looks like X coordinate, Y coordinate, width, height, etc. So that's pretty straightforward. One thing to note is that width, or the X and Y, start at the top left of the page. So positive values kind of bring you down and to the right as you add those. So we're going to do pdf.image. That will be the function. And then we're going to need to pass in a file that we want to display. Well, we don't have any files yet, so this is a great opportunity to see what kind of functions are baked into this repo that we cloned. Probably the easiest place to start is to look at the daily counts file. That has two functions that are useful: plot daily count states and plot daily count countries. If you want to play around and test out what you can do with this, if you go to the bottom of the file, there's a main function that you can run. So if I run this, we see we get some just simple bar charts represent different things. So you can see how those are generated through this, the bottom of this file. All right, so let's import these functions to our new report. So I'm going to go ahead and do from daily counts. We want to import plot daily count states and probably plot daily count countries. That should be useful. And I might just denote some of these up here. These are going to be the local imports, and then these are the Python libraries we need. So right ahead, we can go ahead and do something like plot daily count states. And we'll pass in, how about New Hampshire and Massachusetts. So I currently live in Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm originally from New Hampshire, so that's why I care about these two different spots. And we'll plot it for the last, or I guess the day, we'll just leave blank, so it just uses the whatever's pre-configured there. And we'll save this as file name equals test.png. Cool. And then all we have to do here is just do test.png. So we're using this function that plots the bar chart for states. Let's see how this works. Looks like it ran. The true test though is to check what's in tutorial. And we see, the bar chart is there, but it's not positioned well. So we need to fix that. How can we do that? Well, as we saw with the documentation, there's these X, Y coordinates as well as the width that we can specify. So we really want to take advantage of these. We know our width of our paper is 210 millimeters, so we'll use that to our advantage. So let's just start it at X equals 0. Y equals, well, our title is at 10, so we want to be below that. So maybe we started at like 30 millimeters down. And then our width, this is what's going to be important here. What we could do is just define it as width. So that would take up the full page, but maybe we don't want it to take up the full page, so we subtract 5 millimeters off of that. And that should probably be pretty good. So let's run that again. And we open up our tutorial PDF again. Look at that. Pretty good look. It fills up the entire page almost. You could, even if you wanted to, give it a little bit of an offset. So now it pushes this to the right 5 millimeters, and maybe we want this to be a little bit smaller now. So I'm going to make that -10. Run that one more time. So we're really just kind of in our heads thinking about the dimensions of the paper and like plotting our image in a way that makes sense given that boundary. So I like the looks of this. Looks pretty good. How about if we wanted to also plot some countries right next to it? So I could do plot daily count countries. Let's say US and India. And in just a minute, I'll show you what we can actually pass into both of these functions. I wrote some helper methods to help us, more easily know what we can do. And I'll call this file name equals test2.png, how about? And then pdf.image, test2.png. And now we got to think about this. Ultimately, the goal is to have two bar charts side by side, so we can play around with the values here to make that happen. So to make it easier, I'm going to start this at 0 again. And I'm going to just say that this is the full width right now. But now we want two side by side. So instead of making this the full width, I'm going to do width divided by 2. And probably to give it a little bit of a boundary, but before the next image, I'm going to do subtract 5 millimeters off of that. For this next image, and we're going to start it right after that. So it's going to start at width divided by 2 on the x coordinate. The y coordinate is going to be the same at 30. And then let's just make it the same exact size. So width divided by 2 minus 5. And let's see what this looks like. So look at that. We have two charts right next to each other. And if you wanted to, it might make sense to, it looks like they're a little bit too close to the left side. So I might just do a 5 here and a +5 here to just move them both over to the right. 5 millimeters. Run. Refresh this. Looks pretty good to me. Cool. So that's two different charts side by side. And really for the report, we can just do that with a bunch and just change up the y coordinate as we create more and more charts. Before I jump into that, it is probably worth showing all the different states and countries we can pass into this method, as well as the other methods that are defined in time series analysis. So in the helper method, and also worth mentioning, forgot to do this, but all of this data is coming from a GitHub repo that Johns Hopkins University maintains. I'll link this in the description, but I'm grabbing all of this data from this time series data here, and it's all coming from the confirmed cases, confirmed global cases, confirmed US deaths, confirmed global deaths. And if I click any of these, you can view raw. Ultimately, we see all of this data here. Ultimately, this URL can be read in directly in pandas. If we look at the helper method, if we uncomment this base path and comment this path, ultimately what this load relevant data function can do is read that exact file we were just seeing. It can actually read the URL and pull in these files. So if you ran this script every day, it could pull in the updated CSV because Johns Hopkins is maintaining that repo. They're updating it daily. The reason I have this commented out right now is because I don't think it's necessary to make a bunch of requests to that GitHub file and, you know, maybe overload if everyone that watches this video is doing that at the same time. So I'm using the files that we've downloaded locally in our data folder for now to load everything. All right, going back, the whole point of this was that in the helper method, we have two functions that are get state names and get country names, which can help us just see what we could possibly plot here. Get state names and get helper or country names. And I'm going to just real quick do this at the bottom. So print get state names. So if you want to use a state method, you can pass in all of these different states, and that's how you'll get the data for these places. If you want to pass in countries in the country methods, we can just change this to get country names. And this is just reading from the CSV. It's just a little helper method to show us what columns actually exist. So these are all the countries you can look for. Doesn't have every country, but I think most of the countries that track their COVID-19 data pretty well will be in this list. Just something useful as you build out your own reports. All right, let's keep building out this report. I'll close this up a little bit so we can see better. All right, so I'm gonna kind of more format this more similarly to the report you saw at the start of this video. So that is this one. So we'll maybe have a separate page for global cases, and maybe we'll have like just more comprehensive looks at line charts and past so-and-so days. And we can also create this cool looking map here as well. All right, so let's start building something that looks more like that out. Instead of doing Galli count countries here, I'm going to do states again, and I'm going to just copy the same states as before. Now I'm going to pass this in as states, and I'll pass this in as states, and you could pass whatever states you wanted here. Okay, and now maybe in this one, instead of doing the same exact, I'm going to actually do the death counts. So mode equals, in the helper, I think there's two different modes. So I'm going to import mode from the helper method as well. So the mode of this one will be mode.deaths. So now we're doing the death counts for these two states for a specific day. Run that. If I refresh this, we see now we have the death count on 10/20/20 for New Hampshire and Massachusetts here as well. And now we can start just keep building out different charts. So maybe now we do line charts. So the line charts are found in time series analysis. So the two methods that are going to be useful are plot states and plot countries. So I'll import both of those into our new report method. So from time series analysis, import plot states and plot countries. Once again, you can use that same helper method I showed previously to see what your options are for the states and countries you can plot. All right, plot states. We'll pass in the same states. We will pass in, maybe we can pass in the number of days we want to track over. So I'm going to say the past week. And I'll say that the file name here, we'll just kind of go down the list here. I'll just call it test3.png. And then we'll do a PDF image again. I'm going to copy the same one as above, test3, Now I'm just going to drop down the Y to be 100 millimeters. We'll have to play around with the spacing, but I'm going to see if that works. Then I'm going to go ahead and copy this and pretty much do the same thing as before. This will be test 4, and now this will be the same parameters as the graph that we added here. Run that. What does this look like now? Oh no, what happened? Oh, yikes. How did we get landscape here? I don't like that. I'm so confused. Oh, what the heck? How did this F get here? I don't think I wanted to do that. I don't know how that made a landscape, but whatever. There we go. That looks much better. Yeah, I might honestly even space this out a little bit further. So maybe I'll make this Y coordinate 110 for both. And I did something again. What the heck is happening? Oh, it's me. Oh, maybe is it running? I don't know. Cool. That looks good. All right, and maybe we want to just capture all of this stuff in a nice like method. So I'm going to call this create report. And maybe we pass in a file name. Call this tutorial.pdf as the default name. And we'll shift all of this in with tab to all be in the create report method. All right, and we're just building from here. One thing that's useful to know is that we could do a pdf.add page here. And now these two charts that used to be on the same page as these two charts would now be on a different page. So this is helpful if you want to break up like different pages to be. Now this is going to be file name. If you want to break up different pages to different pages as different like sections, you can use the add page. So what happens if I run this? New or create report, run. So we see same charts as before. Now on that new page, we have those other two charts. And really right now we have all the building blocks we need to build that final report that looks like this. So now let's just tie all the pieces together and make something that looks exactly like this. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and take this type of content here and turn it into a title. So I kind of want to start with a blank slate. So I'm going to actually add another page down here. So really our first page is starting here. And so the first thing I want to do here is going to be add a title. Just comment commenting this so it's clear. All right, so how would we create a title? Well, we could do something pretty similar to this with this cell method, but one thing that I encourage you all to do is to explore what other types of things you can do with the FPDF library. And when I was playing around with this earlier, I found a couple other methods. So cell was one way to write things down on the screen on your PDF, but there was also this write command, as well as a command I saw that was for line breaks. So I ultimately will create a title using these two functions. So here we go. Let's define a new function. I'll just call this create title. It's going to need to take in the same PDF that we're currently editing. And what will this look like? Well, we can copy something similar to this, where we have Arial font, bold face 16. That's probably fine. I'm going to just tweak it to how I have that report. So I had it set to this. Then what I ultimately did was created a line break of 60. So right now I'm just really copying stuff from this generate report.py file. So I might honestly just go ahead and copy this, and you'll see kind of how this plays out in a sec. Okay, here we go. So what does this look like so far? I'm going to we have the create title. So what we're going to do down here is get rid of this and just call the create title method that passes in the PDF. And I'm going to run this real quick. No page open. Oh, oops, I deleted the pdf.add page here. So tutorial.pdf. We see with what we did right there, we just have a very basic COVID analytics report title there. And next, let's set it to be whatever day that we're generating the report for. So maybe we make a tweak to our function here and have this also take in a day. We'll have the title take in not only the PDF, but also the day. So now we can uncomment these lines. And let's just set some sort of day down here. Now create report will take in the day. And what does this look like? Invalid syntax, day equals. Missing one required positional argument, PDF. Create title, day, comma, PDF. That should work. Runs. Now I'm going to refresh this. Now we see that it says COVID Analytics Report and the date. And one question you might have is, why did we start this title so far down? Well, if you remember the final report, we see it has this nice looking letterhead at the top of it. So when I was playing around with creating this report, I ultimately was not really happy with just having, images and text. I wanted something more to kind of make it more professional, more, I guess really more professional. So I was like, okay, how can we put a letterhead at the top of it? And realistically, we could do this the exact same way we put any of these other images on. If we have an image of some letterhead, we can just add that using the PDF image method, just like any other image. So what I ended up doing for this was I used Adobe Spark to create a nice looking letterhead for use in this report. And then ultimately, if you go to the resources folder, you see that there's a letterhead.png and a letterhead cropped. We'll use this letterhead cropped file just because it's smaller, and we'll add that to our PDF. So we can go ahead and right above the title, we will do a PDF image. Then if we go into resources, and it's called letterhead cropped.png, we can grab that. We can start it at x equals 0, y equals 0, and then we'll just give it a width of the entire width of our screen, and that should put it on nicely. Rerun all of this. It might take a little bit longer to run now because we're putting on a fairly large image. Okay, tutorial.pdf. Look at that. So with that letterhead cropped, we added it to the top, and it really, makes it look more like a professional report would. So you could play around with Adobe Spark and make something of your choosing appear. Let's continue onward. Now we're really just going to start copying and pasting things from the report. I think the first thing, I guess before I copy and paste anything, it is worthwhile to see the kind of last images that are part of this repo that we cloned. So in the create case maps file, there's plot USA case map and plot global case map. So I'm going to import that into our report. So from create case maps, import plot USA case map and plot global case map. And what we're going to do here is just utilize this plot USA case map at the top of our first page. So I'm going to go ahead and do plot USA case map. We'll call it USA cases.png, and we'll do it for the day that we've passed in our report. So day equals day. And then we will want to add it to our PDF. So pdf.image USA cases.png, and then we will have it be set to 5 offset. We'll have it 90 millimeters down on the page so that it doesn't collide with our title down here. And we will have it be almost the full width. So I'm going to say width. We're going to subtract 20 millimeters off of that. And this is something you kind of just play with. See what that looks like. Finished. All right, let's load this up. Look at that. Now we have this nice chart. A little bit of background on how this chart is ultimately generated, because it is interesting to know about the code behind this. This is generated using Plotly. So if we go into create case maps, we'll ultimately see that we import Plotly Express as PX. And there's this choropleth visualization that you can create that's ultimately can create all sorts of maps. So in this case, it is creating the USA map. And you can play around with like the color here. You can play around with the range of the colors that it's displaying in that chart. So if I look at that, 3,000 is the max. So some of these, like the Texas and California, might be going over 3,000 in a day. But we're kind of capping off this range color like this. If you wanted this to be kind of automatically generated, you could always just like comment this line out. I guess you'd have to move this to a non-commented out line, and that would allow you to have a range that's not predefined. And I do want to give a quick shout out to, when I was generating this map, I found this Medium post by Joe Santana Vanich. I think I pronounced that fairly okay. And this was super, super useful in learning how to take that Johns Hopkins COVID-19 data and turning it into a nice looking graph like this. And one thing that's really cool about Plotly is you can make interactive visualizations like you see in this little GIF here. But I found this article super useful, so I'll link this in the description. All right, going back to our report, really at this point, because it's just now tying the pieces together, I'm going to just start copying and pasting in the stuff from the completed report file that we've already seen. And one thing I will note before I do that is one thing that could be useful is that as we see over here, if you look at the files that we have in our directory, we see that all of these test images that we're saving are kind of populating right around our other files. So one thing that can be useful is to like have some sort of temp directory and save these intermediate images that we're using for our report in the temp directory instead of directly in our working path. That can just keep things a bit cleaner. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of delete some of these things. One thing I also will note that I haven't shown right now, but plot states and plot countries, also taken an optional end date parameter. So we'll want to use that when we are generating the line charts, just to make sure they end on the proper date. And I guess one final thing I will want to say is that we can, using the datetime library, we can grab the current date. So we don't have to have a hard-coded date. We can grab the current date by doing the following. Day equals, let's see how I did this before. This is something you can always kind of Google, and you might just have to play around with a bit. But what ultimately I did here was I said datetime.today, and then I use a time delta method. So I'm going to import two different things from datetime. I'm going to import from datetime, import datetime and time delta. And so what I did is I know that like the Johns Hopkins data is being updated every new day. So it will have the previous day's data at this, fairly early on in the new day. So I really want to get yesterday when we're generating this report. So I'm going to do datetime.today minus time delta days equals 1. And then I'm going to want to string format that as month, day, and then year. And this is all in the datetime library documentation. What we're taking is like the datetime formatted object, and then we're converting it into a date format that we more kind of usually see. And this date format ultimately aligns with what the columns have in the Johns Hopkins data. However, what they do by default, what this would look like is something like 05, 03, 20, I guess. So note with this format right now, we have a trailing or a leading 0 in both the 5 and 3, if it's not a number 10 or greater. So the last thing that I did to make it the same format is the columns in our data. So the columns in our data look like this, where they don't have that leading 0, is I did a replace of anytime I saw a /0, I wanted that just to become a slash. And then I did a left strip. So anytime I saw the first character being a 0, we just got rid of that. So that's what this line now does. So if I run all of this now, we're going to get yesterday's data. Key error 11.7.20 is not defined. And the reason it's not defined is that we just need to, in our helper method, we want to pull from the URL, so the actual data source. And so right now we're just, for testing purposes, I have it set to ./data. So let's now pull from the online copy of our data, rerun new report. And tutorial.pdf, what does that look like? See, now it's pulling 11.7.20 because we did the stuff with datetime library. And because we set it to pull from the URL where this data is hosted, it can actually get that data. And we see cases are not looking great here in the US. Let's just now, final thing is I'm going to go kind of through and just copy and paste what the final report looked like. So this is basically exactly what we had, but now I'm just copying and pasting the exact stuff in generate report here. So I'm copy and pasting the first page. Need to define states. Okay, so this is the first page. The second page, just gonna quickly copy and paste that in. And this, is very similar. We're using all the same methods we've already used. Copy and paste in the second page. Once again, we're copying this from generate report.py. Save that. Oh, what happened? It's indented too much. And then finally, the third page. Delete this and copy and paste in the third page. And this time we're using the plot global case map, and we're going to plot just US, India, and Brazil. But once again, you can use that helper method that is get country names in the helper.py file to get all of the different options you could have there. Cool. And that's ultimately the report that we're going to generate in this. So I guess I can quickly run it. Finished. Tutorial.pdf. And as we can see, we get all of the data that we did originally. And I guess I quickly will just dive into a couple of the things. Like note, for the first graph, we're getting the past 250 days because this previous days is set to 250 here. One thing that you might be curious about is how are the colors looking like they do. So if we look at that report, the colors are very similar to this peach color that's being used in that United States map. That's happening if we look at like time series analysis. There's these two lines here that ultimately are getting orange colors from an orange spectrum here. So if I uncommented these lines and then got rid of colors right here, that would use the default colors. So this is using a color map. So if you look up Matplotlib color maps, you might be able to play around with cool colors here. But real quick, I'm going to just show you what they would have looked like by default. Tutorial.pdf. We see this would have been the colors by default, the blue. So ultimately I used the oranges to get it more similar to be this color. I'm going to undo that real quick. So you can play around with these things, play around with what types of visualizations you include, but hopefully that this gives you some inspiration for reports that you can generate on your own. That's the ultimate goal of this video. All right, that's all we're going to do in this video. Thank you everyone for watching. If you have any questions about the content that we covered in this video, be sure to let me know in the comments. If you did enjoy this video, it'd mean a lot to me if you throw it a big thumbs up. And also don't forget to subscribe to not miss any of the future videos. We are going to do a follow-up to this one where we actually show how we take these reports that we're generating with our Python script and actually can automatically have that script, run at a certain time, so maybe once a day, and then automatically send an email to people of our choosing with the report content. So that should be a really cool video. Subscribe not to miss that. Once again, I want to give a quick shout out to this video's sponsor, Skillshare. Be sure to check out the link in the description to start playing around with the classes that they offer. All right, till next time, everyone. Thanks again for watching. Peace out.